time to get woke. It's time to get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Get woke.
get woke. God bless you. Get ready for impeachment. Another edition of Make It Plain as we relaunch our show on our brand new platform at DNR Studios. Daily news from the resistance. More on that later. Go to makeitplain.com. But also, we're going to do something very, very special right now. And we have a special guest as we do relaunch the show. He's actually our very first guest in the remake of the show. He's been a guest before. We've talked out in the field, most recently at the Rainbow Push Convention. He's the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. We're honored to have him with us, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Pete, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure to have you. You spoke at Rainbow Push. You spoke at the Essence Festival, and we talked right after your remarks at Rainbow Push, and I want to get to that, but I want to start this way. The Associated Press is reporting just in the past 90 minutes, the special prosecutor who's investigating a white police officer's fatal shooting in your city said today that his probe won't be rushed and will, quote, take as long as it takes. From your point of view, what's the latest in South Bend? What's the climate in terms of the public in and around that shooting?
Yeah, so we had word from the special prosecutor today that, as you said, indicated that they are going to take the time to do a thorough investigation. The sense I have from the community is even though we want answers quickly, we want, above all, to know that those answers are credible and that they're the result of a thorough and impartial investigation. And so I think even though going to an outside investigator has meant that it's going to take longer for us to hear what their findings are going to be, it's a positive step because there's more confidence than there was when it was perceived that you had people here who were connected to the department involved in the investigation. What we're doing as a community is recognizing that we shouldn't have to wait till we learn the specific findings of the investigation into this shooting and this death to act very proactively and energetically to address issues that affect trust between communities of color and the police department. And while working on these issues is not new, it is, I think, renewed at a time like this when we've got so much work to do to build bridges, to make sure that there's clear understanding of the policies and the community members have a chance to weigh in on how those policies could be better, that there's transparency and oversight of the police department, that we make another push on recruiting a police department that actually reflects the diversity of the community that it serves, which has been a major challenge for us as we have not been able to get as many people applying successfully to the department as have left. And make sure that training includes everything from the work we've already done on civil rights and implicit bias to more around cultural competency and de-escalation so that we are doing everything we can, again, no matter what we learn about this particular incident, doing everything we can so that the black experience and the white experience of encountering a police officer ultimately is the same, and it's one where somebody feels a sense of safety, not a sense of fear when you see the uniform.
You, speaking of issues of criminal justice, you talked about that at the Essence Festival and acknowledged the growing number of African-American women who are incarcerated and in contact with the criminal justice system.
That's right. That's right, and I think everything about the systemic racism that hangs over our criminal justice system has disproportionate impact on women, not just women affected by the increased incarceration rate we're seeing, but also women who are left to hold families together when men are incarcerated, often at a disproportionate rate, often for nonviolent drug offenses, and far too often incarcerated long enough to lose their jobs and damage their families pre-trial before there's been any determination of whether there's even a conviction. And so we know that women, and in particular black women, are bearing the burden of the inequities in our justice system. And I think it's important for everyone in politics, but frankly, especially men. And certainly men who are not from communities of color to be demonstrating an understanding of this and a sense of urgency about reducing the harms of mass incarceration in this nation.
You also, at the Essence Festival, unveiled another program, and I want to go back and talk to you again about the one we talked about at Rainbow Push, the Douglas/Marshall Plan, but you also brought up a plan at the Essence Festival, the Madam C.J. Walker Reginald F. Lewis initiative, I believe.
That's right, yes. The idea of the Walker-Lewis initiative, and it's part of the bigger framework of the Douglas plan to invest in Black America. But this is specifically about Black entrepreneurship. And I want to make sure that when we are talking about so-called Black problems, we're also talking about Black solutions. And we know that you can't talk about the inequities in health or in criminal justice without talking about economic empowerment. And one thing we know generates economic empowerment for people of color in this country is making sure that there are entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds. And when you have Black-owned businesses, they're much more likely to employ and empower Black employees. So the idea of the Walker-Lewis initiative is to make sure the federal government is doing its part. That means debt relief for people from disadvantaged backgrounds who start small businesses and employ people. It means having federal co-investment in startup enterprises, because we know that access to capital is a disproportionate barrier for Black entrepreneurs. Right. And it means making sure that we drive a higher rate of federal purchasing from these businesses so that the purchasing power of your taxpayer dollar is actually going towards solutions.
A professor whom I know, and you may have heard of, Dr. Ron Daniels, he actually is one of the organizers of the historic 1972 Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Where everyone was. Dr. Ron Daniels organized that, and for years he's talked about himself a Marshall Plan for the Black community. In fact, we spoke yesterday, and I said, have you and Mayor Pete talked? Because he's talking about a Marshall Plan, but he was gratified that you're bringing it up. Tell us a little bit more about the plan overall.
So the idea is that every facet of American life right now is different for Black Americans, and we have to address all of them at once. We're talking about health, home ownership, entrepreneurship, education, criminal justice, as we discussed, and democracy, the ability to vote, and that we need a plan for all of these things. And the reason that I think it's helpful to invoke the Marshall Plan is to remind Americans that we did this to rebuild Europe. Now we got to do this right here at home. Mm-hmm. And it puts specific commitments with real resources behind them on everything from education, where we've got to do more for Title I schools and do more for HBCUs, to health, where we've got to empower communities putting together equity plans to deal with disparities from Black men being more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes to Black women being more likely to experience harm or even mortality during childbirth. That all of this requires intentional action. The criminal justice area that we just talked about, entrepreneurship, as we just discussed, and home ownership, where I believe that the federal government should be investing in helping people acquire homes, especially if they're from redlined or gentrifying neighborhoods. And all of this has to happen in parallel to the conversation that's happening about reparations. I don't think we have to wait for that commission, although I believe that it should be formed, and I would sign H.R. 40 as president. But I don't think we have to wait for that to know that we need to be making these investments, because what you have is a wealth gap that is the consequence of generational theft. Yeah. That has excluded people from participating in our economy and in our national life. And this is not some historical, quaint, distant thing. A lot of this is the consequence of policies that were enacted within living memory. You look at home ownership and you think about how things from access to VA loans and the GI Bill to the Federal Housing Act itself right after World War II were set up in a way that Black Americans could not take advantage of them. That's created inequalities that are only going to compound themselves over time. And so the fundamental idea of the Douglas Plan is that it is not enough to take a racist policy and replace it with a neutral policy and expect things to get better on their own, that we have to put intentional action and real resources into addressing these inequities, and that when we do, the entire country becomes stronger.
You said, Mayor Pete Buttigieg is with us, you said at the Rainbow Push Convention, I can't remember exactly, and I wonder if you can remember your words, but you talked about the time frame, how we're either closer to or further removed from civil rights. Can you repeat that phrase? I should have written it down, but it was very interesting.
It was a thought that came to me because I was rereading James Baldwin, and he had a line in his letter to his nephew in 1963 about how America was celebrating 100 years of freedom 100 years too soon. And it got me thinking about 1863 and emancipation, and then 1963 and civil rights. And I realized we're closer to 2063 than we are to 1963, which means if we really want to say, okay, 200 years after emancipation, we're finally getting somewhere, that's actually going to depend on the choices we're making right now in 2019, 2020, 2021, to decide if we're going to get there in my lifetime. But believe it or not, we are closer to 2063 than we are to the Civil Rights March.
Oftentimes, and obviously you are speaking directly to the African American community these days. In the past, Mayor Pete, as you well know, sometimes that was perceived as pandering. But I think now people are well aware of the fact that the African American electorate can decide the presidency, particularly African American women. I mean, you really can't win the Democratic primary without taking black voters seriously and doing all you can as a candidate, any candidate, not to take our votes for granted.
That's right. It's the right thing to do. It is also politically imperative, and that's a good thing. We've reached a point where in order to succeed, you need in particular to mobilize the votes of black women, but more broadly need to be engaging black America, and that's certainly the case in particular within the Democratic Party. My generation is the most diverse yet in American history, and the one coming afterwards will be more diverse still. And if we ever want to see economic empowerment and economic equity, first there has to be the use of the political power, which of course is exactly why we see a lot of racially motivated voter suppression going on around the country, and everything from gerrymandering to making it harder to register to vote and to vote. But the bottom line is that I think any candidate who wants to be taken seriously needs to address very specifically the concerns of black voters, who, by the way, are I think, tired of being lied to, disappointed, or taken for granted by Democrats as well as Republicans. And it's a burden of proof, I think, on any among us who are running to explain what we've done, to explain our records, to own up for all the work yet to be done, and more than anything, to put in very specific terms, put a marker on the record right now while everybody's watching about what we aim to do in the Oval Office, that we can be held accountable for delivering in the future.
Do you feel that you're beginning to get some traction in terms of support in the African American community? Let me just say, people I know who are African American, even some relatives I know, like you. They're very intrigued by you. A lot of people, you've raised a lot of money recently. Obviously, your popularity is growing, but the polls, though, are still saying that you're down, particularly when it comes to African Americans. Are you beginning to see a difference at all?
Yeah, I can feel that we're gaining traction, but I also know that this is going to be something we really have to earn. I think the response I get right now is people are interested, they're curious, they're encouraging. But in order to actually commit and support us, they need to really see the goods, and they need to see us invest the quantity time, not just in the public engagements we've had, but also a lot of conversations that happen when the cameras are not around, meeting with leaders and activists and pastors in various communities to try to make sure that we're shaping an agenda that is truly responsive to what voters expect of us. And that's a conversation that I think is a very healthy one. And while I sense that it's headed in the right direction, I know that we're going to have to earn every vote, and that's what we're out here to do all the way until Election Day.
When we were in Chicago, a bystander said this to me. This bystander, as you were speaking, described you as the gay Obama. What's your reaction to that?
Well, that's any comparison to President Obama is pretty flattering. So I appreciate that. That's a high bar to live up to.
Yeah. Lastly, I'll be honest. As a politico myself, I look at the situation back in South Bend. I mean, Are you concerned? I know I would be if I were in your position. This shooting case, and we know these things take time, but one of the things that is so upsetting to those of us who are African Americans, Mayor Pete, is that so many of these cases result in no prosecution, no consequences for the officers involved. You're running for president, man. I mean, can you afford for a case to end up that way in South Bend? I mean, ultimately, that's, even though you're not the special prosecutor, you're the mayor. And some people are going to, look towards you if, hopefully that won't happen, but it's just so common. It's almost inevitable. We get our hopes up and then nothing happens. But are you concerned about that and that affecting what you're trying to do right now in this campaign?
Well, I'm very concerned, and my main concern, of course, is that this process have a fair outcome that leads to transparency and accountability. But I also recognize that even though many parts of this are beyond my control, I will be held accountable for everything that is under my control. And that's why we're working with community leaders on everything that we can, both in terms of making sure there's an appropriate response to this case, and more broadly, making sure that we have a good plan moving forward to deal with everything from the relationship with the police department to the bigger economic picture. As I've said, these are not new concerns. We've been working on these for the 7.5 years I've been mayor. But there is a renewed concern, and I think a renewal of focus on these things. And I know that I will be answering for all of the areas where we're not there yet. And like every diverse American city, we can point to a number of measures where we're not satisfied with where we stand.
Yeah.
But also make sure that the things we have done and the steps we have taken, especially with all the scrutiny and all the pressure, allow us to put forward a model on how a community ought to react when something like this happens.
And making sure that everybody knows, too, about what you're working on. I chaired the NAACP Police Task Force in Washington, D.C. for a number of years. And we did all of that. We started, some of us, I even taught a class at the Police Academy, ended up on diversity awareness and sensitivity. We were then in Washington, D.C. able to establish an Office of Civilian Complaint Review. So when communities are involved in that way, it can happen. We even had a community search committee for the chief of police. The community was directly involved in vetting candidates and all of that kind of stuff. So I know it's important. And, in the long term, hopefully everything will work out and everyone's involvement and diligence will make a difference. We pray for that. And I know you do as well. Mayor Pete, our very special guest. So where are you now on the campaign trail? Where are you headed? Where's the next stop?
So I'm at home right now in South Bend looking after community matters. We'll be on the road soon in Iowa, New Hampshire, and putting together our next South Carolina trip now. So it's a lot of road time, a lot of early states in particular, but crisscrossing the country looking for support and trying to get the message out. All
right. Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I'll always ask candidates in fairness, it just says you got a whole lot of money, so you don't need any more money, right? Or do you need to, or you good?
We need all the resources we can get to make sure we got the organizers on the ground doing good work. And but we're very pleased, of course, to have led the field in the second quarter, and it means we're going to have the resources to really compete.
So give everyone the website, please, if they want to make donations, learn more, get involved.
So PeteForAmerica.com is the best place to learn more about what our plans are and to offer support if you'd like to get involved. We promise to respect your email address if you share it with us, but we do want to be able to keep in touch with you. And, of course, we're always looking for help and support. Follow us online. We're on social media. Or just check out that website. And we really want as many people as possible, as many voters, and certainly the most diverse possible base of supporters to feel that they're invited not only to support the campaign, but to help us shape it as we go forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Pete and I are featured in a photograph in Politico, and alas, that photograph did not discourage him from reaching out to me and wanting to talk. So I appreciate that. And we'll keep up the great work on the campaign. I'm sure we'll see you out on the trail again very, very soon, Mayor Pete, and good luck to you. We'll talk again, okay?
I hope so. Look forward to it.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Take care, man. All right. Bye-bye.
Alrighty.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, folks, here. Our very first guest here on the new Make It Plain in our new home. This is DNR Studios. It stands for two things, Derek and Romaine, and also Daily News from the Resistance, because that's where we'll be, 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. And we invite you to go to makeitplain.com to find out more and to subscribe, as a matter of fact. You can declare your independence and subscribe to Make It Plain directly. It's not through anything else. You just subscribe to Make It Plain for $6.95 monthly, and you'll get live programming every day. We'll also be producing a free podcast twice a week, and those of you who subscribe will get that podcast earlier than everyone else. But we'll continue to, we talk to just about all the presidential candidates, and they still continue to reach out to want to talk to us because of you and because of what you represent and because of their respect for you as our MIP audience. And we thank everyone for all the support they've given through our transition from one platform to another, but we're here. Go to makeitplain.com, tell a friend. We go live Monday, July 15th, every Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time, here live from Daily News from the Resistance Studios right here in downtown Manhattan. So this is kind of cool. That's a brand new thing that's being built. I'm one of the first people to use it. Mayor Pete is my first guest, so this has been great. So please, man, please, sir, go to makeitplain.com and do subscribe. We appreciate all of your subscriptions. All right, we'll get ready to go away for now. Share this video. This video will be available for everyone. This segment, this audio as well, will be available for everyone to share as a little tease of what we're going to continue to do. We're going to continue to talk to these candidates. 2020 is an important time. So very important, because we know we have to do something about the orange one. So again, makeitplain.com, get woke, get ready for impeachment. It has been made plain. We'll talk Monday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Go to makeitplain.com and do subscribe. Thank you.
It's time to get woke.